afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Or as Freeman would say, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm John Jeffries. I'm Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and I welcome you to this combination of Social Sciences Forum and Lipitz lecture. The next event in the Social Science Forum series will be almost as exciting as this one. With April 10th, Nate Silver, who does the 538 column for the New York Times on politics, will be coming to campus to give the Social Science Forum lecture. So I certainly warmly invite all of you to that event. Today, however, we will have the 5th annual Lipitz lecture of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. The Lipitz lectureship is the only really supported such lectureship in the college. It was supported by an endowment created by Roger C. Lipitz and the Lipitz Family Foundation, and I quote, "to recognize and support innovative and distinguished teaching and research in the arts, humanities, and social sciences at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County." The Lipitz lecturer for this year, Professor Leslie Morgan of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, is an extraordinary scholar, teacher, leader, not only in the university, but in the nation and around the world. She's one of the foremost scholars, both nationally and internationally, of aging. She is author, co-author or editor of 6 books, 33 peer-reviewed articles, 16 book chapters. She's won an impressive amount of funding from the National Institutes of Aging. She served on editorial boards of the leading journals in her field. As a result of her research achievements, a fellow of the Gerontology Society of America, a charter fellow of the Association for Sociology in Higher Education, and she's won the W. Cottrell Award for Lifetime Achievement in Aging. Her service at UMBC has included, by no means confined to, but has included being co-director and founder of the combined UMBC, UMB Ph.D. program in Gerontology, chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, associate College of Arts and Sciences, and associate of the Erickson. Withal, she's an extraordinarily talented teacher and mentor. She has received the Distinguished Faculty Mentor Award at the University of Maryland of the Phi Kappa Phi Honor Society, and she has recently been awarded last year the Distinguished Teacher Honor for teaching that stands out as exemplary, innovative, and of impact by the Association for Gerontology in Higher Education. It is hard, if not impossible, to imagine a member of our community more distinguished and more talented and with larger impact than Leslie. She'll be talking today and a subject to which I will give rapt attention as I approach within a few short weeks my own 70th birthday. She will be talking about dilemmas of longevity, society, the fourth age, and you. Professor Morgan.
I would like to start by giving some thanks. This isn't going to be an Oscar speech, but I would like to, first of all, thank Roger Lipitz for his gift to the university. I'd like to thank the college for everything and this award moving. I'd like to thank my longtime colleague Kevin Eckert for nominating me. I would like to thank the members of the selection committee for choosing me. I would like to thank my colleagues of many years. There's quite a few of those in the room, and I'd like to thank you all for coming. In this particular year, I took the opportunity of the Lipitz Award as a time when I could do something that we have surprisingly little time to do in academia, which is to read and think. You know, our time is challenged enough that these are rare and wonderful opportunities. And so I started last summer reading willy-nilly in all sorts of areas, crossing boundaries. My training is in sociology, but I've never particularly let that be a limit to me. And so what you're going to hear today is kind of the cumulative result of that reading and thinking time, and befits a scholarly presentation. I thought I would start with a quote from a great thinker, a great social philosopher, in this case, Marx. Perhaps you thought. I've always enjoyed this quote from Groucho Marx. I don't care to belong to any club that would have me as a member. There are variations of this, but the message is the same every time. And as Groucho suggests, as a social scientist, I and my spend a lot of time thinking about how we fit ourselves in groups, what brings us together into classes, castes, political parties, religions, communities, clubs, families, and the converse of that, what divides us. Key to what I'm talking about, the boundaries that we draw socially, economically, politically, religiously, and otherwise, as being meaningful, socially, and meaningful, they come to have meaning in us as well. Growing out of this, of course, are a lot of things that are less nice. Some of the stigmatizing behavior and stereotyping and distancing that often is social life. This includes all of our isms, racism, sexism, and for me, the one that's actively discussed, for whatever reason that is, ageism. One conclusion drawn by many scholars is that we tend to discriminate against groups to which we do not belong and are likely to ever belong. I would suggest to you that there is a notable exception to this, and that's ageism. Ageism is pervasive in our society, and you know, it really comes from deep roots, and I want to talk a little bit about that today. Tornstrom describes Western cultures as really liking to organize and systematize things. We value having organized ways of thinking about putting things in boxes, and this tends to highlight distinctions. We apply this to many places and in many different ways, but we certainly apply it to the life course. We look at categories. If you look at various societies, anthropologists do this a lot. Often there are very simple distinctions between child and adult and some lovely rite of passage that moves from childhood into adulthood. But of course, we're not really going to leave it at that. What we have seen in modern industrial and post-industrial societies, massive proliferation of stages of the life course. One of my favorites that emerged in the past few years was the tween. You can't just have a child and a teenager, you have to have a tween. And I recently learned that you can't just have an infant, you have to distinguish between a newborn and an infant, and a toddler and a preschooler, and you know, we have just developed this massive set of categories and lists of places, and we all know that there are social meanings attached to them. When I say teenager to you, our culture has taught you that teenager has certain characteristics. Whether they're true or not, you can't let any teenager say not that teenager, but you tend to think of teenagers as a whole having certain shared characteristics. Because of this way of looking at the world, we, of course, think of old as a natural category. Of course, there is a place in life that is old, or later life, or whatever you label it, and we don't ever really question that. But what is old? And what does old mean? And what does old do for and do to us? Well, so we're going to talk about some dilemmas related to this that pertain not just to people who are 60 or 70 or 80 or 90, but people who are 20 or 30 as well, because we are all individuals. People thinking about aging has a very, very long history. It goes back as far as records go. For fountains of youth or philosopher's stones that will make you immortal. It's not just about death, though. You know, some people say, oh, this is about avoiding death. But you notice it's not called the fountain of not death. It's called the fountain of youth. The idea of long, and there are tales and aphorisms about people who for immortality, but they end up with immortality in an 89-year-old body. And so we've really been thinking for a long time about something else, something other than just extended life. One of my favorites of all times was Shakespeare's description of the stages of man. He called it the stages of man because women weren't in the picture so much then. But it ends with this, you know, stage of all, sans eyes, sans teeth, sans taste, sans everything. Now, who wouldn't want to go there? I mean, you know, it's a pretty bleak picture that we get through the ages. We also have as fixtures in our culture certain anthropological ideas about aging. The traditions of certain cultures that venerate elders because they are closer to the ancestors that are worshipped. And the counterpoint to that, the long-standing Eskimos placing their elders on the ice floes and shoving them off to sea because they no longer, you know, are helpful and they're eating up the food. And of course, you know, we could look more in depth at each, but you know, these two contrast really sort of extreme, and probably neither one of them have ever been purely true. But we have them as fixtures of our way of thinking about later life that is maybe not all that helpful. So, by way of introduction, the 4 dilemmas I'm going to talk about, and my major difficulty in doing this talk was that they're all related to each other in very complex ways. It was hard for me to disentangle them, but I tried. Each of these dilemmas pairs a certain success with a challenge that success engenders. The first is the dilemma of longevity itself. Second, whoops, a little bit away there. The second is the dilemma that we face and is about widely in our society for age-based policy. The third is the dilemma of what is now called successful aging. And I know some of you know that term and some of you may not know that, so I'll explain it. And the fourth is the personal dilemma that each of us faces as people who are aging, how to navigate through our lives successfully and well in an ageist society. So let's go through them in order. First of all, the dilemma of longevity. This photo, by the way, lovely ladies up here are mother and daughter. You see them both, their silver hair and their wrinkles, and they are photo taken as part of one of our research projects. They are representative of this dilemma in a very real way. We have had in the last century incredible success in expanding longevity for people, differentially in more and less developed countries, but still all societies are going in the direction of greater longevity, some faster than others. Not just that, we have expanded what's called healthy life expectancy, the number of years that people live before they experience serious disablement, serious illness that slow them down, change their lives. And so, you know, back to the whole issue of the fountain of youth, we don't want an extended age of illness and unhappiness. We want this. The fastest growing group is seniors. People over 100 are growing very fast in numbers. We even had to coin a term. Here's another stage, supercentenarians. Supercentenarians are people who live past 100. Yeah, they're growing in number. They're likely to continue to grow in numbers in the future. And the fact we have a name for them, us that we watching this, right? One The points that I want to make emphatically is that the change we're seeing is not a short-term change. Some people talk about the boomer bubble. They use a couple of other catchphrases. The oldest one is the pig in the python. The idea that the baby boom was a big meal that the population ate, and gradually it's through the system of the snake and being digested, and that its effect will pass away. And the other one is the silver tsunami. I like that one too. It's, all alliterative and everything. Well, you get silver tsunami, and after the tsunami, it does damage, and things are really a mess for a while, but then stuff goes back to normal. Well, the change in the profile of society is, I am here to tell you, really permanent. Okay? Even though we think of it as this bump that's going to go away, there is another bump after that. There's increasing longevity still going on. So we are heading toward having 1 in 5 people in the United States over 65, and that's not really ever going to go away. This is a permanent change. And so, accommodating the boom is one thing, but we really need to think much more long-term than that, because the issue is much more long-term than that. So we have about 40 million people over 65 now. 50 years, that's going to double in the United States. Okay? Dramatic. All right, so what's the challenge? This sounds pretty good. We're living longer, for the most part, healthier. What's the challenge? Well, the challenge is what to do with this time, what to do with this stage of life. Historically speaking, this is a new problem we have. And so just saying that what we've been doing or however we've thought about things is going to continue to work is a little bit problematic. So what is the purpose of old age? What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to be? How are we supposed to act? For the most part, old age is defined by what you are not. If you're in a family, you're probably not actively parenting unless you're taking care of grandkids. You may be retired, so you're working. There are many things that you are not and things that you are. And so it is by the negative that a lot of thinking about adults happens. In the 60s, Irving Rousseau talked about the role of it's a position that occurs in society, but we really don't have any expectation for what people in it should do or be, how to act. When you're an adult, we have things we expect to be. Into retirement on your own. The early proposition in this bargain was that what you want to do is, you can play golf, and you can take up painting if you've never done that, or other endeavors, and whether that's meaningful or not to everybody, I don't know. I don't aspire to a retirement of playing golf. That's just me. It might be other people. But making the assumption everyone wants to, should, and be interested in sort of, I'm going to crochet until I die. Questionable to me. And one of the elements of this is that we think about people in society as having value, having what's called social capital, on them being productive. This theme will come again in my talk. We value people based on productivity, on their contributions, on things they do for people in society, and especially in the labor force. We like that. We also have a problem here. Just what do we call people a certain age? What would we want to be called when we're over certain ages? We don't really have a good answer for that. I note in other areas of social life where there's awkwardness, oftentimes we have a problem with terminology, like the person who's not married to you, who lives with you, with whom you have a sexual relationship. You can call that person a partner, but that doesn't do justice. If you call them your lover, your Aunt Lily's going to be upset. And, you know, and so we have a space there. We have a good answer for that. And here we have a bunch of terms we could. Senior citizen, that's been around a long time. Teenager, also a good one. Old person, kind of bland, but the silver market consumer, that's a relatively newer one. And, you know, I could go into more derogatory ones, but we don't need to go there. Just use one, which is quite sufficient to the point. As we'll see a little bit more in detail, very few people embrace a label of old attached to themselves. Well, they're perfectly to attach this label to others. So what do we really think of old age? Think about it. Well, one of the things I note in my training is that age is a master status. And by that, sociologists mean that when you walk up to a person in a social situation, you immediately notice certain things about them. You probably notice their and you definitely notice their age. And depending on where you are and who you are, you will notice clues about social class and maybe other kinds of clues that they give you about education or other, but you will definitely notice their age. We, in these terms, because we have learned this way of thinking. It's the way culture trains us to think. You look at a kid, you want to know how that kid is, okay? Because that tells you how you to the child if you can't, okay? And so age is a primary focus in social interaction in society. And so what is this ageism business anyway? One of the interesting, to go back to the early part, is that age is actually a prejudice about our own feared future selves. The attitudes that we have, negative primarily, toward old age are really that will come back, circle back, touch us in very meaningful ways as we grow older. I can tell you. All right. We have a fairly constant ageist input. I have a note later, but I'll just tell you this now. Deaf people have lower anxiety aging, lower ageism scores because they get the visual, don't get all the auditory part of the stream of information, okay? And so there's actually, because they have impairment, they don't get the full program, but if you have all working, you're getting it all the time. And the problem is we don't even realize we're getting it. You know, things are going all the time. Before I go further, question, how many of you are looking to an aspiring this person walking down the hallway in the walk in the hands? Okay. There is a point about the alternative. Really we think about ourselves and our futures. Just wish to play in this situation, and we go to lengths to avoid thinking about it. Authors who talk about ageism in their writing describe discussion of adults as if they are not fully adults. They have lost some of the traits and characteristics that are required to be really full-fledged. You know, you have middle-aged people, and you have, you know, is an old person really equal to a middle person? And there are points where this question is very important. A lot of our discussion about focuses on independency. You know, people who have impairments, who have to rely on others. We're Americans who hate to rely on others, okay? We're independent by God. As we grow older, we begin to see on the horizon the fact that, oh, that could be me, okay? And so, you know, it's important to think about what you say and what you do and how you look at these things, because it is not somebody over there. Remember, and the other? It's all of us, okay? Think about and react to and describe and make fun of adults is something that can, and if nothing, will in future pertain to us. Happy, happy. All right. So there is some interesting research on of age and how people think and react in the world. And this is some interesting work by a woman named Levy who writes some fascinating stuff. She's a psychologist, and she does some interesting research where she will have in a room to do some sort of experiment, and she'll be testing. I'll show you some of the somethings in a minute. Before the thing starts, flash subliminally on a screen just terms, and have you do the procedure, whatever the procedure is. And systematically, older adults who see this, even though they're not flash maybe, but they're not consciously aware of having seen or were put up there, they perform more than people who did not see those messages. In things doing math problems, your ability to see them when they're tested, they have elevated blood pressure. So to suggest that these things don't have an impact, I think is unrealistic. I just saw a study come out recently on the effect of positive terms of age. And they do have an effect in the direction. They improve performance, but the size of the effect was about the size of negative words in the opposite direction. Saying good things, saying bad things hurts a lot. When you get to be an older person, whatever we want that threshold, that you would stop being an ageist. No, no, all still ageists. And we shouldn't realize they think of themselves as other than them. Okay. Still the distancing going on. There's still the attempt to say no way or to do things that separate you. So, you know, in some of the research projects we've been doing in recent years, people who avoid showing signs of decline if they can hide out in their rooms so that nobody sees that they're having trouble talking, or in one case, a woman was losing her sight and she didn't want anybody to see her using a magnifier because they might ship somewhere else. So people are really scared by this stuff, and not perhaps without reason. We just had, with about 5 or 6 other colleagues, just had an article about who moved into an community. I can't remember if I think it might have been 62 or older. And these were leading edge boomers who moved in and immediately created a boomer club because they didn't want to hang out with those old people. And one of the people who was a leading light in the social scene came over to welcome them and invite them to participate in activities. And they basically said to her, go away, I want to hang out with old people. You're old enough to blah, blah. And we don't want to listen, you know, you don't like our music and we're not like you and we're different. So even though they had moved into an age-restricted setting, they were not at all amenable to thinking about themselves as people growing older. You know, it's baby boomers. It's been going on for a while. And I want to talk a little bit more about what's called age identification, kind of ties together. So what is age identification? Age identification research has been around for maybe 50 years, and it's a long-standing set of research that asks people to identify themselves in terms of where they are, where they think of themselves as being. The early research asked people, you know, they gave them a set of, like, I'm aged, I'm mature, I'm older, I'm elderly, you know. They said, pick one. Not surprisingly, hardly anybody picked identities that could be called identities. And these were all people over 65, okay? And so there was some slight trend. People who were in the 80s and 90s would accept those labels. 60s and 70s, middle-aged. Stay over there, middle-aged. And the second way that this is done, and the more modern research on this, asking questions about how old you look, how old in terms of activities and things you do, how old do you act, and how old do you feel. So these are called feel, act, and it's called mature age. And how much anybody owns up to their current age here? Yeah, right. One person did in the back, but she's kidding. these average 12 to 13 year gaps that people say, I'm 13, 12 years in terms of how I act than my chronological age. I literally have a cartoon of a woman looking in a mirror saying, be me, I'm a younger woman, you know. And this is really, you know, another socialism showing up through humor, but really, and this has been for 40 or 50 years, so it's a consistent finding. Not be surprised at all at this rejection of these labels because of the baggage they carry. Sum up the first dilemma of longevity: we have added time, added health. We have meaningful outlets. There are some, sure, but you know, golf and bingo, grandkids. We love the bingo. Bingo. Oh, you all aspire to do bingo when you retire. Some people retire thinking they're going to travel the world, and they realize what their actual money is, and they go, not so much. Do that. So all this takes us, in my mind, even if it's not in your mind, neat second challenge. The dilemma of age-based policy. This is one you've heard about in the media, and so I can kind of go through this one a little bit quickly. But I do want to talk about, you know, the background, because there was a span in the United States where we looked at older more kindly, especially in the political world. Robert Binstock, who wrote about these issues extensively, talked about the issue of compassionate ageism. Now, you know ageism, but at least it's compassionate ageism. This is of time from the 1930s until the middle part of the 70s, when all the big programs were created. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Americans Act, things. So all those entitlement programs we're fighting about now came out of this era when it wasn't just, you know, mom and apple pie, it was all grandma. You can do that, not so grandmas, okay? Went through in the end of the, well, in the 19th century and the early parts of the 20th century, the institutionalization of retirement, moving from working until they physically couldn't anymore, often dying before they could, to the span of time after work that we all now as normal, although we're tending to pull back from that a little bit now. And so we had these ideas, okay, there is this, and it starts at 65, because that's when they set the policies. 65 became the big number. Well, our success here is that we have done really well with these programs at lowering poverty, improving health care, although that's a moving target all the time. But, of course, is do we still want to keep these programs in their current form, and if can we afford them? The dialogue of green users in the last 20 years or so has been really amazing. You know, the idea that older adults, because of their sheer numbers, and also some scurrilous attributions about, you know, not wanting anything less than their full lifestyle, and a threat to the future of their children and children. We still hear this every week in political dialogue. But I want to talk about this using a long-standing statistic that the Census Bureau called the dependency ratio. And I find the name of it very informative, the dependency ratio. And this has been around for a very long time. I'm going to show you a very long of data here. The dependency ratio is, in a very crass way, assuming that under a certain age is dependent and anybody who's above a certain age is dependent, and that everybody else in the middle is productive. Okay. So for the chart you're going to see, it's anybody 18, dependent, not productive, anybody over 65, dependent, not productive, and everybody in between productive. So you already see the flaw here, right? This is slippery, but if you do the same thing consistently, you know, you still have problems because women went into the workforce and stuff, but here we go anyway. So from our friends at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this is right clear from 1900 up to 50, and you'll see there's been changes over the span. We have, this is the total dependency ratio, the sum of the other two parts, and you'll see we had a bump here. We know what this bump is. Baby boom. Okay, this is the child dependency ratio, same bump, but what happens after that one's going down, right? Well, this is 65 and over dependency ratio. Oh my goodness, I think I see a bump. Who's the bump? Same people, baby boomers. They aged from here to here, from childhood to later life, okay? And if you look at the overall dependency ratio, and this is the number, how many dependents are per 100 workers, okay? Actually was at its highest in 1960, right at the end of the baby boom, and it has gone a bit, and it is going back up. But what's different is the composition of the dependency ratio. We have a decline in the child dependency ratio, increase in the old age dependency ratio. So why does that matter? It matters who supports children. Mostly their parents, and some state-based programs, some federal, but more state than federal, and local programs for schools and things like that. Who's footing the bill for some age programs for older adults? Federal government tax dollars at work. So more of this burden is federally financed through taxes, and a smaller percentage of the burden is financed through federal taxes. So the relative impact is the same, but also important that this line has gone up a good deal. If you remember, Social Security was right back here. There were grandmas there, so paying for it, not such a big problem, okay? So if you do what's called the apocalyptic demography, fear that you are in fact going to be run over by a huge stampede of baby boomers, and that, you know, we're in deep Social Security for a long time, but this time. A couple of other things that students often, to their great surprise, when they think about geezers, they often think that there's a lot of people, 75K, 200K more incomes. Well, if you look here, we have 55% of households over 65 have $1,000 a year in income. We have 26 or so percent who have $7,000 or more. There are some serious outliers on the high end, but there's a lot of people who are poor, near poor, but those people don't get factored into the discussion too much. Most of my students, if I show them, and I show them a slightly different graph with more detail, are really, really surprised because they've been convinced that most older people are wealthy and that, you know, you can undo security and that's not a problem. This is a good one. This is worth. And it looks like, you look over here and you go, oh, these people over here, these people have got some worth. This is total net worth compared to these poor younger people here. That's total net worth, including the value of your home, your equity in your home. If you take that out, these are the bars of how much money people have, okay? And so, you know, there are some distinctions here, and we wouldn't expect people under 35 whopping amount of money, but really, you know, we're not talking about dollars here, okay? So, you know, that's a couple pieces of that puzzle. The other thing that sometimes gets glossed over is the anti-poverty effect of Social Security, because most people over 65 are eligible for it and receiving it, both Security and Medicare. And for the poorest people, often Social Security is their only source of income. They don't have a pension. They don't have savings. I've seen various estimates. The current poverty rate for older adults is only 9%, which sounds pretty good. You look at child poverty and it's higher and you go, oh my, that's a serious problem. If we take away Social Security, at minimum, and I've seen much higher estimates, the percentage of adults who would be poor jumps by 17%. I've seen as well, affecting approximately 20 million people who would become poor overnight if security went away. So the second one, the policies have succeeded. They were a victim of our success. The costs of the policies are rising with increasing longevity, also with the baby boom. And so we're in this, we're locked in political debate, some gridlock in Washington, to discuss how to get out of this dilemma. Although some people are treating it as a temporary dilemma, not a permanent change. And the issues here is any changes you make may differentially different groups, men and women, wealthier or poor, in what you think through very seriously. And part of this policy debate is also on how our ideas are changing. So let's be successful. You all have probably an intuitive idea of successful aging and what it is. Here, and gerontologists have been fighting people to see this for a long time. There are a lot of people who are successful aging. That is, they are not ill, they are not dependent, they're not in nursing homes. Anybody know what the percentage in nursing homes is now? Looked it up. Of people over 60, 4%. 4. Yeah. So what we've been doing gradually is our collective view of later life, but as far as I see it, is that we may be substituting stereotypes for ones. We have several ideas here. I'm going to go through them quickly because they're all interwoven. Terms like productive aging, civic engagement, successful in the third age, which gets us to the fourth age, which was the title. So I got to do that one. And you see this all over the popular culture. So what is success? Classic definition of successful aging? And successful if you have no major disease, have no disability, have high cognitive function, are actively engaged socially. And studies have been done in the US, Europe, in Canada, and about 10.5 to 11% of people over 65 meet all those criteria at one time. If you miss any one of them, you're out. Okay, you are unsuccessful. Congratulations, successful. So how did we get here? We have these ideas of success, and they align very much with our cultural ideas about things. Our traditions in this nation were on the work ethic and the Protestant ethic of hard work and productivity, your worthiness, whether it's to God or to your peers. And so we value work, we value productivity and contribution. And so what happens when you retire? You don't have that anymore. Well, sorry, got premature there. David Eckert, no relation to our Dr. Eckert, about 20 years ago came up with the idea of the busy ethic. And we see this in some research interviews of older adults who say, you know, I'm so busy, I've never been busier, I'm so busy, I can't schedule an interview in 2 weeks because I'm very, very busy. So, and in their minds, I was busier than I was when I was raising kids. How can this be? And so the valor of productivity has been placed for the middle class anyway, with valorizing busy and being really socially engaged. Productive aging and civic engagements are two sides of the coin. For a couple of decades, we've been talking about contributions that older adults make to society in an unpaid fashion. And so look at things like volunteering, grandparenting, caregiving to frail people in your family. It's estimated to be valued if somebody was paid to do it at $17 billion a year, so not a trivial contribution. The civic engagement piece is actually activities to support your community, working at schools, helping out at the schools. And some people are really touting civic engagement right now to sort of underweight the cost of entitlements. You're getting money doing for it. You're doing nothing. You're being retired. Well, if you're doing something, then there is some capital gained. So our creativity extends beyond if you stopped working and are therefore unproductive, valuable. Let's fix that by work. About that. So our creativity has not moved us beyond that, although it works well because it's well with the way we look at the world. So age, which will get us to the fourth, which is an idea put forward by Ph.D. and historian a few years ago, relates to the stage of aging, the golden era of post-retirement, health, income security, and productivity. A little bit like successful aging does to me too. is that they are not equally available to all. Qualities of early life continue into later life. So people with physically challenging jobs with extremely low income are likely to have those continue into age, and consequently, not everybody has a great shot at successful aging or at the third age. This is a concept that works mostly for economically developed nations. Less developed countries, older adults still until they drop. Health prevents, but it assumes a capacity to do things, a willingness to give back that is also very much imbued in aging. Lest you think I'm just a beefcake. I show this also to my students because when I first saw this photograph, I went, whoa, and now he's my poster boy for the age. And here's why. Most of my students do not expect to see that head on that body. That exemplifies the disconnect we have. If this guy's in and you're sitting next to him, you go, you don't know he's buff, right? He's just an old guy. You look first at his physique, you think differently about him. So the fourth age is the age, the era of poor health, dependency, and the time leading up to death. In this age, it is not possible to be productive, so any social capital you may have gotten from either busy or committing to civic engagement, pretty much. I would contend that the age is really a proper way to think about what we talk about and feel when we talk about old age. Okay, all of old age. I think the third age is pretty groovy, but fourth age, no. So I can say that our age and our anxiety about all this mostly adheres to the fourth age. You know, you see people 85 is 85. Well, all that means is pushing the goal line farther back. You're still going to get ageism. You're still going to be socially devalued because you're doing things that are productive, but it's likely to occur later. In essence, some people talk about this as the young old, the old old. I prefer the third and the fourth age. So, what does all this do to us? One thing about having successful aging is if you have success, you also have failure. And so people have the poor luck or bad taste to not hit all those 4 items also get, you know, the disadvantage of the fourth age visited on them regardless. So the other side of this, people who are third agers are living under constant threat of moving into the fourth age. You know, I'm just one hip fracture away, I'm just one, you know, small stroke away, I'm just one thing away from losing my driver's license, from losing my capacity, whatever it is. And so my argument is they're delaying, but certainly doing nothing to get rid of the stigma of old age. And all of this fits really nicely with our value on are worthwhile when they're productive, they're doing things that we recognize and can see and value. And it's no less of a stereotype. So let me give you a few manifestations of how to look at this. We have lots of narratives in our media and advertising. You know the gallows of greeting cards, Maxine and her little dog, and other examples. We have third age all over the place advertising. We have people marketing the silver, and by that they mean the third agers. These are some examples. Laugh at them, don't feel embarrassed. I laughed at them. They are the way we construct the humor around anxiety. It's our gallows humor. Live each day like it's your last, you'll be right. You know, this is, but this is in a way that we need to be thoughtful about. Second example is the field of anti-aging. Geriatricians, for those of you who don't know, medical doctors who are trained extensively to be able to treat older adults and the special needs that they have. There are, we should have, for the older population now, about 14,000 of them. We have about half of that. But we have 3 times as many anti-aging doctors who do a lift or a tuck or some hair follicles, don't have them, or any number of other things to make you look younger, not to be younger, mind you, younger. And so, you know, medicine, big bucks, have long-standing, there's long tradition here. I can remember when I started out in this field, people were selling bracelets to arthritis, or they were doing sheep injection, monkey glands too. Ew. You know, we have hormones, we have tons of cosmetics. I did a search for anti-aging and got 15 results. We don't know what the cost is. There is no central way to collect that information. You know, you have things like this. Lovely lady who's, I think, rather than being photoshopped good, has been photoshopped to look bad. We have this particular example of cosmetics. I'm sure she's probably young and airborne in the bargain. So why are you going to look like her? No. But again, she doesn't look like her. We have threats to sexuality. Women get the cosmetics, men get these messages. But even though they try to make this palatable, it is still possible to turn it into ageist. Third, brain fitness. You've all heard about brain, right? Well, their question is, can you avoid Alzheimer's? You work that brain. I don't worry about any of you here. You're working. But it is an estimated $3 million industry for gadgets, games, books, apps, all kinds of things you can get. It's based on the premise that your brain, like your bicep, responds to exercise. And there really isn't any foundation for that. It works, you know, you saw my poster boy. There is very little substantial evidence, and I mean very little, and a lot of the research is done by the companies. So if you say, oh, research is not so much. This is responsive to our real anxiety about what really is losing our minds. Okay, get to it later. There are people who do polls, you know, die than, and having Alzheimer's, you know, get 10% of people who admit they'd rather die. So successful aging, even though it sounds real good, it ends up coming off negative in my mind. We get constant messages that valorize people who are successful. I saw a film at a conference on 99-year-old senior athletes who are doing, you know, the senior Olympics, but, you know, that's part of the picture. Yeah, it is not full. We, or not, even sending birthday cards contribute to the, and I already told you the data on persons. So, dilemma number 4, how do we navigate this? We are all aging people. We are all at risk. There is some contradictory evidence here, good and bad, and I'll give you the bad first and then I'll give you the good to finish up. Anxiety. I wonder why I have balloons up there. It's because we're number 1. The U.S. is on top of something. Of all the countries that have been studied, we have the highest level of age anxiety. Congratulations to us. Age anxiety is done with some sort of, you know, multi-item asking you questions about things that you fear and things that you look to, and it really reflects our wide fear of the 4th age primarily. And prompts people to think about and take the steps that we talked about. One example of that I recall from one of the studies is who was in an assisted living setting who had significant impairments but insisted on her hair. And she did this at great effort and with some assistance because she said to us that she didn't want to like them because they had given up. And she was not going to give up. She was still. So I'd rather die than have to. I'd rather die than go in a nursing home. We get substantial percentages of Americans who say that. So again, we're reinforcing our devaluation. And yet, we really have some positive stuff if you look at older adults. I love the title of an article that I read last year, Still Happy After These Years, a bad take on a Paul Simon, but an article overlooking, you know, doing a review of all the research over decades, how relatively happy and satisfied with older adults. You'd think hearing all this that everybody's sitting in deep depression. No, so much time, a lot of them. Most older are living independently in their own homes. I told you about people in nursing homes. There are other places they may live. Most are still married, especially men. Most are actively engaged socially. Most are not depressed or socially isolated. The great majority are able to afford their own lives and what they want to do, and they're able to get around. Even if it involves a cane, they can get around. This is a study from the Pew Research Center. I recently apologize, it's a little bit fuzzy, but it is an interesting study. They're asking people 18 to 64 what they think older experience, and people 65 and over actually experience. We have memory loss, not able to drive, seriousness, not sexually active, feeling sad, not feeling needed, lonely, trouble paying bills, being a burden. This is what 18 to 64 year thought going on. This is what people report. Okay, lower. So they're not saying there aren't any problems. The incidence of problems is much lower than most think before we get there. So let's leave us. Well, you know, it's easy for us to think about us and the other being old people, but we really need to think about the fact that we are future old people. In terms of thinking about treatment of and regard for older people and how we talk about them, how we deal with them, you know, in mind a good idea. We all participate in ageism. I like cards to the bad jokes, you know, because we learned that frame of reference. These are deeply embedded in ideologies and the socialization of people in culture. So this is not an easy target to move. But I think it's an important one. We pay attention to racism, we pay attention to sexism. I don't see so much attention to racism. We had the Grey Panthers once upon a time. They've pretty much gone away. So as individuals, we each need to think about how we want to navigate the life course as aging individuals to the old age that we would like to have, rather than maybe the age that society tells us to. So that's so welcome to questions.